Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Right Guys podcast with two guys who are always right, just about everything. Well, their wives might disagree. And now your hosts, Max McGuire and Josh Hammerlin.
My wife definitely disagrees.
Does she?
Definitely. 100%. Not 100%. But often.
Of the time. It's a good track record. 100% of the time. Why not?
Well, welcome back to another edition of the Right Guys podcast. My name is Max McGuire here with Josh Hammerling. Big news. We are transitioning the show into a 2 times a week show. Big news. Right now, Wednesdays and Fridays. We'll give some time for the news of the week to percolate. I think this is going to be good, Josh, because what I've found since we've started this new podcast is that the once a week is kind of hard. You're either late on a news story or you just missed a really important story that broke the next day. Right. So hopefully twice a week will give us a chance to talk about things that have already happened. And since so much stuff gets dumped on Thursdays and Fridays going into weekends, talk about stuff moving forward.
And that's the strategy, right? Dump it on a Friday so nobody sees it and make it easy so nobody's paying attention, right? And then if we can take a little bit of time to make sure people see what's going on, then, the word will get out and the revolution will begin. I'm sorry, did I say revolution? I've got to be really careful about that. The feds might be watching.
Well, one of those stories that we missed because we went live last week that broke on Thursday, Friday, going into the weekend was this Lauren Boebert story. We're going to get into what Trump said about abortion, but this Lauren Boebert story is crazy. I get it. It's a bad look for any congresswoman or congressman, for that matter, to be getting to second base in a crowded theater. Not good. But the more I look at this, the more it's very obvious that this was a setup. And I don't like going into that because it makes me feel conspiratorial.
But there's people that do that stuff, man, all the time. There's always those hidden cameras. Like they try to put you in compromising situations to try to cause an outcome, right? Especially right before elections, and then they're trying to give the fodder. But you really think that's a setup? I mean,
the guy she's on the date with, either she completely failed at vetting this guy, or he was a plant. There's no way she goes on a date with him if she knew everything about him. Case in point, I'll go ahead and put up my screen. The man, I don't like calling it groped. She got a little handsy in the theater. I don't think it's a groping. But the man owns a gay-friendly bar in Colorado that hosts drag shows. So I can't imagine that Lauren Boebert would have gone on a date with this guy if she knew that. Because the number one talking point coming out of this is, oh, well, Lauren Boebert doesn't like drag shows, but here she is at a family-friendly event getting handsy. They teed it right up.
Yeah, and look at the seating. I mean, look at where she's positioned. In a night vision camera, she's suddenly on the
infrared.
Edge of the eyeball. And infrared, right? Just watching it, like you can see the whole thing. You watch her vape. She's reaching into his lap, and it's like, well, she's 39 years old, and she's a congressperson. You think she might do a little bit of research, or on the inside, she's just secretly kind of that way. I mean, everybody's got fetishes, right? It's real.
Just came up.
Yeah, it's a bad look. Whatever it does.
I think that whoever set up the cameras for this theater, I think it's the Buell Theater, might be mispronouncing that. Whoever set up those cameras needs to be hired by the Bureau of Prisons and by the White House, because the cameras weren't working when Epstein was suicided. Cameras weren't working when Hunter Biden's dropping little baggies of coke around the White House, allegedly. But the infrared cameras are locked on, perfectly centered on Lauren Boebert. So whoever set up that camera system really needs to reach out to the White House and the Bureau of Prisons, because shocking how on point that was.
Right. Well, I would be a resume builder for them. I mean, they've got all the necessary skills. They might even work at one of the casinos here. Right?
Yeah.
Catch the bad guys. But who gave her the tickets? What prompted all that? How did she get those tickets? You got to kind of smell it when something's fishy. You got to think it's fishy, right? Maybe she got free. This is all speculation. What if somebody's like, yeah, come out, or somebody just saw her name when she put that stuff in the machine to say, hey, I want to go to the show, which means that somebody's paying attention to that stuff, right? And then you got enemies of the Buell. That's Colorado for you.
I don't know. We don't have to go too far into it. I just wanted to bring it up because this is a story that we missed last week, and lots of moving parts in this that are very, very fishy. But
hilarious. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah,
It's kind
it
of
is.
hilarious.
And,
It is.
And we can also objectively say that we don't want our representatives doing that.
Act according to the office, right?
Yeah.
Go there, present yourself in a good manner, and then leave. Don't be a 39-year-old honeypot that's trying to get freaky in a theater.
And that's not to say, and that's not to say that she's the first person ever to engage in a little petting in a dark theater. Obviously not the first person ever to do that.
Won't be the last.
But it won't be the last. But probably not even the only one to do it at Beetlejuice. But at the end of the day, not something that you want to see. And hopefully she learns from this. And hopefully this is a really educating experience for her in terms of just understanding that the media is out to get her. She knows that. But anyway, we don't have to go into it too much. Just wanted to comment on it because very, very fishy.
Set herself up.
So Josh, I support Donald Trump. I think you support Donald Trump, right?
I do. I do.
Are you ultra MAGA as Biden would claim? Where do you fall on the MAGA scale?
Well, first off, I'm trying to figure out what ultra MAGA even means. I don't want to pay a lot of taxes. I don't want corrupt government. I don't want the vice president, selling off. I mean, I'm sorry, acting as a brand for other people, or have my son smoking crack. So if it means to be ultra MAGA, if that's what that means to be ultra MAGA, I am.
Yeah.
But I like somebody that supports my Second Amendment rights, wants to keep taxes low, wants to keep business in business. If that's what MAGA means, then yeah, I'm on board.
Yeah. Well, that's a phrase that Joe Biden has used to justify branding half the country as enemies of democracy. Remember that red backdrop, evil Hitlerian speech he gave?
Right.
They've branded ultra MAGA. I typically break it up into a couple of different categories of Trump supporters. There's the reluctant Trump supporter who doesn't really like him but understands that there's no other choice but to vote for him. There's the supporters who like most of what he does and votes for him. And then there's those ultra MAGAs. On the campaign trail in 2015, Donald Trump famously, or infamously, however you want to say it, said that he could go out onto Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and he wouldn't lose any support. There are Trump supporters who, if that was to happen, would rally to his defense. And you know what? Maybe it was self-defense. Who knows? But I have definitely fitted in that role for a lot of the Trump scandals.
Yeah.
And putting his foot in his mouth kind of stuff. I really don't like what he said this week on abortion.
And you've had a really strong stance on abortion since the day I met you. You've always been on board. Like, you've never wavered, not once. So I understand why this would trouble you. When I watched it, I just shook my head. I was like, are you trying to piss off your whole base, or at least half the base? Half the base.
Yeah.
And it's disturbing. I don't like it, but it is
disturbing. It is disturbing. And we'll play the clip. For some reason, Donald Trump decided in an interview, Meet the Press, I think it was, he decided to attack pro-life positions. Very strange. Let's just roll. We'll roll the clip and we will talk about it on the other side. Here's the clip of Donald Trump on Meet the Press.
And I want to give voters who are going to be weighing in on this election a very clear sense of where you stand on this.
I think they're all going to like me. I think both sides are going to like me.
What's going to have to happen
is you're going to have to listen. You're asking me a question. What's going to happen is you're going to come up with a number of weeks or months. You're going to come up with a number that's going to make people happy, because 92% of the Democrats don't want to see abortion after a certain period of time.
If a federal ban landed on your desk, if you were reelected, would you sign it at 15?
Are you talking about a complete ban?
A ban at 15 weeks?
Well, people are starting to think of 15 weeks. That seems to be a number that people are talking about right now.
Would you sign that?
I would sit down with both sides and I'd negotiate something, and we'll end up with peace on that issue for the first time in 52 years. I'm not going to say I would or I wouldn't. I mean, DeSantis is willing to sign a 5-week and 6-week ban.
Would you support that? You think that
I think what he did is a terrible thing and a terrible mistake.
it's really hard. Now obviously I consider myself part of the pro-life movement. I was just on a conference call yesterday working on Ohio, because Ohio has a big ballot initiative up for the vote in November to allow abortion up until the moment of birth. Going from a 6-week heartbeat bill in Ohio all the way up to abortion up until birth. This is really hard. And having spoken to other pro-life leaders in the movement, we are having a really hard time wrapping our heads around this, because we supported Donald Trump. We support him on 95% of everything else. But to come out and attack, there's many reasons you can attack Ron DeSantis, many reasons that probably are unfair. But to attack him for signing a bill that says you cannot kill an unborn child after that child's heart has started beating, that is hard to accept.
Reconcile for you guys. Yeah, especially on that side of it. What I'm thinking is this has to be some sort of play towards women, especially with women's choice. I feel like this is more of a political move to try to shore up vote right before an election. Problem is that the people that got you in the office the first time, you really lost them. You lost them there. So what was it a good trade-off? Are you happy though that you've kind of picked up that audience, we'll say? I mean, the play has to be there. It has to be a play for votes. That's the only thing I can think of, because to do an about face on that is, I mean, that's whoever's advising them. This one feels like a miss, like a really, really big miss.
This is the best and worst part of Trump, in my opinion. It's that he is politically malleable. And like in the pro-life movement, we see this as a generational fight. There are like my grandparents, my grandfather, who's no longer with us, he was marching for life at the first March for Life after Roe versus Wade came down. Entire generations of Americans have lived and died fighting for life, understanding that it might not come in their lifetime, but they will advance the ball forward. And we've done that. We've passed bills to ban abortion after 21 weeks when a baby can start feeling pain, 15 weeks, 6 weeks when a heartbeat is detected. And it's such a shot in the gut to hear this, that it is radical and terrible to protect a baby after the baby's heart has started beating. I mean, that's the most generic way to define life. You check for a pulse. If someone's heart is not beating, they are legally declared dead. There's other ways of being dead, like brain dead. But generally, lay people and doctors understand that when your heart stops beating, you're dead. And if they can get that heart beating again, you're alive. It is not radical or crazy to say that when a baby's heart starts beating in the womb, which is scientifically proven. I put it in my book, link in the description. It's scientific. I include but I include pictures of actual like MRIs and CAT scans of fetal hearts as they're in different stages of development. And you can see that at 6 weeks, all of the major parts of the heart have formed, and there's electrical activity and there's blood pumping. It's a heartbeat. It's just really hard. It's really hard. And it feels like a shot in the gut. And we know he's malleable. We know he's not really, Donald Trump is not as pro-life as I am, or as you might be, or as many pro-life Americans. It's very obvious that he took that stance in 2016 to win evangelical votes. You can hear what he said about abortion previously. You know that this isn't a deeply held position for him that he's had over decades. What I don't think Trump understands is that just as he was doing what he needed to do to gain votes, there are a lot of pro-life voters and faith leaders who disagreed with Trump on a lot, but voted for him because of his position on this. Yeah. And I think he takes for granted their support and takes for granted just how many people he pissed off and the political repercussions of it. I don't expect for politicians to be perfect. I don't. But if someone says that they're pro-life, I do expect for them to hold a position that doesn't include making pro-aborts happy. I'm like, if someone claims they're pro-life, I don't want them to go out on Meet the Press and saying the pro-aborts who want to abort a baby up until the moment of birth. That's what the bill that that the Democrats in Congress tried to pass last year. I expect a pro-life person not to say, oh, those people are going to be really happy with me. Sorry, maybe I'm old-fashioned.
Did he really? Yeah, at one point, he didn't really take a stance. He just called what DeSantis did bad. He kept avoiding answering the question. So he was giving the political answer, and he gave ultimately a political answer at the very, very end. His team might be scrambling right now. We don't know. Like, that interview could have caused some real turmoil on the campaign side for Trump. So maybe there might be an about face. I feel like they can't do anything about this because once they let this cat out of the bag, it's out. I mean, there's no going back. And I've just got to, I don't know if it was a political answer. I just don't, Max. I'm hoping it's not his personal held beliefs, but he was a Democrat a long time ago.
He was.
Long time ago.
He is in damage control a little bit of damage control. I'll go ahead and read his tweet. Quote, his Truth Social. Sorry. Quote, I was able to do something that nobody thought was possible. End Roe v. Wade. For 52 years, people talked. Spent vast amounts of money, but couldn't get the job done. I got the job done. Thanks to 3 great Supreme Court justices I appointed, the issue has been returned to the states where all legal scholars on both sides felt it should be. Now the pro-life community has tremendous negotiating power. Like Ronald Reagan before me, I believe in the 3 exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. Without the exceptions, it's very difficult to win elections. We would possibly lose the majorities in 2024 and perhaps the presidency itself, but you must follow your heart. In order to win in 2024, Republicans learn how to talk about abortion. This issue costs us unnecessarily but dearly in the midterms. So it's an about face, but it isn't. If anyone needs to learn how to talk about abortion, it's Trump.
It's not a strong suit. I wouldn't like. That's maybe why he's not in debates right now, because there's certain issues that they might be able to pop him on. And with this comfortable lead in the polls, I mean, why would you want to go on there? I mean, Reagan was the last one to kind of skip the on the Republican side, skip a bunch of debates. It kind of hurt him. Ultimately, he still won. I think they're trying to feel like this could be the same sort of outcome. But again, I mean, if you're going to do damage control, you got to do damage control, or you got to stick with what you went with. I mean, people can smell bullshit.
Yeah, they can.
You know what I mean? Mandy
in the comment section just said it would have just been better if he said he would stand by the Supreme Court's decisions and leave it to the states. Yeah. I mean, that's what a lot of Republicans are doing. Yeah. It's very weird that he took this stance. He took the same stance as Mike Pence, and I was at a Catholic think tank in California where Pence gave a keynote, and when he said we need to only allow abortions up to 15 weeks, the room was silent. He got maybe a dozen people to clap for him. Very, very harsh reaction for Donald Trump to see how Mike Pence took this position, and it completely backfired. And this is someone who has the chops to talk about abortion, right? Mike Pence has been in this movement his entire political life. For Trump to see Mike Pence step into this position and lose support, tank in the polls, and just go up in flames, shocking that he chose to follow it. But this might just be a situation where he believes anything that Ron DeSantis does, he has to say is wrong. I don't know. Trump is malleable. That's the good news. Also the bad news, because he can shift on you. I hope that someone, it looks like it based on that Truth Social post, I hope someone can just get to him and sit him down and explain why this is a terrible idea.
I think it's, there's a reason they call stuff like this the third rail of politics, right? It was always Medicare, Medicaid, but this one is certainly one of them. And whoever's advising him right now, this is just a crap storm. I mean, there's too much going on. I was just trying to find the latest Quinnipiac, and I'm still searching, but I don't think he's taken a dip, because if he had taken a dip for such a stance, it would probably have been reported to no end, right? They would love to see it a 5% decrease, a 10% dip.
Well, they're going to hit him at the debate. They're going to hit
most likely. Is that tonight or is that tomorrow?
I don't know.
I thought it was
he's
tonight,
not in it, so I really don't pay attention to them.
right? It's just kind of like watching the all the runners up, first or second and third place up there. But
next week, 27th.
Okay, so that's what I'm thinking. I don't know, man. Like, it sounds like a really bad play to try to pull in a whole new voting demographic, because if he is taking the evangelicals for granted and he's trying to shore that base, trying to pit two of those bases against each other, or two of those groups inside the base with each other, is not going to go over well. I mean, it could really hit hard when it comes to voting time, and we could be staring down Joe Biden presidency 2.0.
It's one thing to say it's one thing to say that he doesn't want to go too far to the right during the primaries because he doesn't want to have to then defend that during the general. It's another thing to actively campaign for Democrat votes during a Republican primary.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think there's many Democrats who will vote for him because of this. They have a million other reasons to hate him. But when pro-lifers hear this language saying that we want a deal, what did he say? He said the pro-life community has tremendous negotiating power. No, absolutely not. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't a deal. This is babies who have the right to survive. It's a basic human right. And no, we're not going to turn a blind eye to babies passing away so that he can strike a deal. I'm sorry. And 15 weeks, the vast majority of abortions happen before 15 weeks with the abortion pill. Very few surgical abortions nowadays happen after 15 weeks. So he can talk about overturning Roe versus Wade all he wants, but if he was to impose a 15-week abortion law nationwide that would undo heartbeat bans, right? Total bans. You probably have almost as many abortions as were happening under Roe versus Wade. I don't think you'd see a big dip. And that's what I don't think he understands.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I hope someone can get to him. I hope I'm not jumping ship, right? People have asked me, well, are you going to support DeSantis now? No. But this makes me very uncomfortable. And it certainly has taken me from that ultra MAGA position of, oh, Donald Trump did this. Oh, we probably had a good reason. It has taken me from defending him, which I've done on almost everything he's done, to now sitting back and saying, yeah, I'm going to vote for him, but I really don't like this. And it makes me uncomfortable. It should be making him uncomfortable. But no, you can't vote for DeSantis at this point.
It's
come on.
It feels like a betrayal to those who have been in the trenches fighting for this for decades, right? And when you piss off a group of evangelicals, boy, you watch out, because they'll make it known. You know, they will vote with their vote, or they don't vote at all. And if all they have to do is not vote, right, and then it could be all over.
Yeah.
Off of one statement. I was looking at the 538 polls. I think he did this one on the 17th. It was this Sunday, right? Is when he did this, and there's not really too much of a dip. He's headed down to 55% since that day. I mean, we're talking about less than a percentage change. So the polls are indicating that it hasn't really hit yet, but let's see what it looks like in a week. Let's see if they hammer him on another question, right? Maybe they're waiting for another statement to come out of him. Maybe the damage control is working, but it's a punch to the gut, Max. It's
a punch to the gut, and this isn't something he can't walk back. But it's going to take some humility. It's going to take him saying, "Listen, I've talked with faith leaders, and I realize that this is not the right move." I don't know if Trump has that in him. I don't think he has a sorry in him. We'll have to see. But it's not just this. We don't have to talk about this all show. It's not just this, Josh, because Trump was on doing an interview with Megyn Kelly, and she asked him a very simple question that has dominated conservative politics as a litmus test for conservative candidates for the last 3 years. And it's a very simple question of, can a man become a woman? And his answer, while it is it's the position we want to see from him, was very awkwardly delivered to the point where you don't know if he means it. I don't know. Let's go ahead and play this. This is the cut from Megyn Kelly's show.
Can a man become a woman?
In my opinion, you have a man, you have a woman. I think part of it is birth. Can the man give birth? No. Although they'll come up with some.
Can I watch that? Do you want to watch that again?
Yeah, let's watch it.
I kind of want to watch that again.
Can a man become a woman?
In my opinion, you have a man, you have a woman. I think part of it is birth. Can the man give birth? No. Although they'll come up with some.
Like he reached the answer we wanted him to reach.
Yeah.
I wasn't able to pull the whole clip because all the clips I could find easily pullable were all from the DeSantis camp, and they all either had music or DeSantis clips interspliced. They're going heavy against Trump on this issue.
Yeah, and it makes sense because that's how you would want to go after him. I mean,
he got to where you want him to get, but he seemed very uncomfortable with getting there.
Yes.
And in the second half of that, he talks about Caitlyn Jenner, born Bruce Jenner, and he says, like, I knew him as a man. He was a handsome man. So obviously, this position is it's largely controlled by his relationship with Bruce, now Caitlyn Jenner, right? So obviously, there's an uncomfortableness in that. Just as a point of fact, his argument that you're either a man or a woman, and the determinant factor is whether or not you can give birth. There's lots of women who can't give birth, right? So it's more of the issue. I don't know if the Daily Wire has great content. Was it Matt Walsh has great content on this? It's not whether someone can give birth. It's whether that person is capable, generally capable of giving birth. And the example that he uses that I use, I love, is if a woman goes into a doctor and she says, I'm having a hard time conceiving a child, the doctor's going to say, okay, we can run some tests and we'll figure out what's going on. Maybe there's a medical or a surgical or a pharmaceutical solution to this problem. If a man comes in and says, doctor, I'm having a hard time conceiving a child inside me, please help me, no doctor worth their salt is going to then say, okay, let's run some tests, right? I mean, it's because generally men are not capable of having babies. Generally, women are capable of having babies. That's a very complicated answer. It's like Trump sat through a briefing once and is just firing it out there. It's not what you want to see because DeSantis has been all over this. Like, he's been leading the charge on this. You could blindfold him, hang him upside down, and start dipping him into a tank of sharks, and he still would be able to recite the talking points, no problem. Recite the position points. He has it down. Maybe Trump's taking it for granted. I don't know. It's the right answer we wanted to see, but it was awkward getting there. Go ahead.
I don't think his people had him prepared for that question. I saw the look in his face when he blew hard, like, oh, this one wasn't supposed to come up.
Yeah.
And then you get the uncomfortable laugh. You always get that laugh when you're like, oh, well, I don't know. And he answered it to the best of his ability for what his base would want. Now, he may have a lot of transgender friends. We don't know that. He doesn't want to sour that relationship too, because in your personal life, you don't want to, Bruce Jenner and him are friends. Generally, you don't want to tick your friends off. You don't want to piss your base off. But that was a rare, unprepared moment for Donald Trump. Yeah. He was not in the zone, and his people didn't have him ready. And if he did have an earpiece in, which I doubt he did, somebody should have been screaming in his ear at least some sort of answer, and that wasn't happening. Yeah. So whoever's running, I would start looking at my campaign people today and see if they're the right people for that. That's kind of a simple answer. X and Y chromosomes. What's that?
Yeah, it's
X or Y chromosomes. That's what I bring it down to.
I mean, he can have a biblical answer. Sure. It might come off as like a little bit untrue coming from him, giving his personal faults to the past, sins of the flesh. But he could have a biblical answer, say in the beginning, God created man and woman. Mm-hmm. That it is unnatural for man to think that he can engage in that godlike behavior. that is a power that is vested with God. He didn't create any in-betweens, and he didn't. It's his power, right? You could have a very simple biblical answer that gets you out of it, and basically caters to the base. I don't know who his campaign manager is. I'm looking it up right now.
Yeah. I just want to kind of make the point in anthropology that they tell you that gender is fluid and it can be whatever you want. But biologically speaking, there is no third sex in which you can reproduce with. It's not like a man can go to third sex and have a baby with him, and a woman can't have sex and have third baby with this magical other sex, right? There's only really two biological sexes.
Yeah.
And whether I agree with that or not, I mean, it's the biological reality. Now, as the anthropologist in me, I've got to be like, well, it's a social construct, right? You've got biological constructs and you've got a social construct. And what we're looking at here is a social construct, which means it's a social issue, which means it's a cultural issue. So people can be whatever they want to be. You can present yourself as whatever you want to present yourself as, but other people don't have to accept it. And that's where I think the line, people don't, like, they say you have to accept me because I've chosen to do this. The answer is no, I don't have to accept anything you do, right? I don't have to accept the idea that you would think of yourself as that, right? Whatever that may be.
And that doesn't mean you don't treat everyone should be treated with dignity that you give to any person. But like the notion of what you see in like Canada, where people are fined, or UK where they're fined for misgendering someone.
Yeah. And arrested for a misgendering situation. And what happens when that case what happens if that happens here, right? And then somebody gets ticketed for a misgendering in some democratic city or whatever, and they go to court over it, and that has to be then put into words. That has to then enter the legal standard that we put out there, you know. And then the court's not going to take a stand on it. They're just not, because they don't want to define what a man and a woman is. And in fact, there's some recent court cases where, you know, the courts refuse to define what a woman is, right?
And there's also cases where they've done a really bad job of defining what a woman is, where they've taken like labor laws to apply them to civil rights statutes. I mean, this is kind of, I guess, a good segue into what we're going to talk about next. It's what did the legislators intend when they passed the law? Does anyone can anyone say with a straight face that when civil rights laws were passed in the 1960s and 1970s, that the men and women writing and voting on those laws intended to protect transgenderism? I don't think so. No. Considering that these were passed after the civil rights movement, it seems very obvious that they were primarily catered towards protecting against discrimination on the basis of race. Then obviously you have discrimination on the basis of sex. And you mentioned gender, how they're taught now gender is a social construct. There's been a decades-long battle to conflate the terms gender and sex. In school, most kids learn gender because teachers know that it's awkward to just start throwing out the word sex with kids, right? So
kids, right?
Yeah. So it's kind of become a synonym, but it isn't. They're not the same. They're not the same. They just aren't, right?
They're not. No.
So you have to look at what the people who wrote the laws intended when they wrote them. And I don't think anyone can possibly really say with a straight face that when these statutes were written at the time, the goal was to make sure that biological men could get into women's restrooms or women's changing rooms.
And Max, you got to remember, at the time when you went to see a psychologist about having these feelings of transgenderism, at the time it was called a gender dysmorphia and was considered a mental health, right? Yeah. And then that changes somewhere in I want to say the early 2000s, that, you know, the code changes in the psychology book, because
the DSM.
You know, it only exists as a mental health as if you can charge some sort of insurance for it, so it gets paid. So that gets changed, and now that we've got this weird argument about, you know, was gender dysmorphia a real mental health issue, or was it just always an idea of being fluid inside of the genders? And I don't have an answer to that, other than that when they wrote those originally, it was considered a mental health issue.
Yeah.
Right.
And I have that big problem. We used to talk about this when we were on Conservative Daily years ago, but for other issues. I've always had a really hard time with the DSM, the DSM-5, DSM-6, whatever number they're on, is basically decided by a vote of the psychiatrists who make up the Congress, whatever the voting body is. So the DSM, the contents of the DSM are inherently political. And when you see things that have been considered mental illnesses for decades, centuries, get voted out of the tool that doctors use to diagnose problems with people, when you see it voted out, and when you see political groups lobbying to have it voted out, it just that doesn't feel like science. Like imagine if someone lobbied the College of Orthopedic Surgeons, and they voted to declare that broken bones were no longer a thing, right? I mean, like,
right.
Like you just can't.
Max, that's where the crux of it. You said that this doesn't sound like science. You got to remember, psychology is not a science. It's considered an art. It's an arts degree. So
they're artists with prescription pads.
It's true. It's absolutely, and they're the ones that are like actually affecting people's minds and the way they think about themselves, right? There you have it. There's the difference. Is it an art or is it a science? And that's where the argument gets left.
Yeah. It's uncomfortable. The whole thing's uncomfortable. That's why I'm glad my kid's in a private school. He came home. He's a private religious school. He came home the other day. He's like, "Daddy, did you know there are only boys and only girls?" I'm like, "Yeah, let's do this."
Sit down, son.
It's kindergarten.
Sit down, son.
He said, "Did you know God created boys and girls and only boys and girls?" I was like, "Yeah, that's my tuition."
There goes all money well worth it.
Yeah. That makes my tuition payment easier to stomach.
But it's not like that in public schools, right? The totally different argument. And like, this isn't what we were thinking of, but what does that mean when you start having all these biological males start competing in women's sports and expecting the same sort of treatment that women get? And that's where it starts getting muddying the water altogether. Because there are women out there who do not want a biological male in the locker room with them. And I get that. I don't even like being in a locker room with other guys, you know what I mean? Let alone having to be forced in front of others, right? It's an embarrassing thing. It's a modesty thing, right? Now you've got to throw modesty and religion out the window for what the state deems to be accurate, or at least the law.
My understanding of that has always been that the reason you don't put like boys in the same locker rooms as girls in school, especially pubescent boys and pubescent girls, is that when you do that and they're getting naked, there's a serious risk that someone's going to get pregnant. I mean, that seems like the biggest reason to do this. It's not being mean to anyone. It's not gatekeeping who can get in. It's protecting girls from sexual assault, protecting girls from rape, protecting girls from being impregnated. And like there's a clear-cut case. It's the Loudoun County case. I know you followed it. We followed it when we were Conservative Daily, where this transgender student assaulted a girl in the bathroom. The school covered it up, and then the student got transferred to another school and did it again. And thank goodness the father of that victim, he was charged with a crime because he interrupted a school board meeting. Thank goodness he just got pardoned. But like, this is the common sense stuff. And you can treat someone with dignity, you can treat someone with respect, but we have to take a step back and just recognize that this is crazy. And I wish Donald Trump, again, this is not me jumping off the ship, I wish he had better answers for this. And I fear that by not participating in the GOP debates, not prepping those debates with mock debates and coaching and understanding how to answer tough questions like that, I fear that he is lulling himself into like a sense of of being safe, that he doesn't have to prepare these answers. And it's only going to get worse when he has to get on stage with Joe Biden. I mean, the best moments of the 2016 campaign were when he's up on stage dissecting every Republican and cutting them to shreds.
It was brilliant.
I understand why he's not participating. I hear he's going to be meeting with striking auto workers instead of doing the debate. But I'm worried that he's missing valuable experience in both preparing these talking points and getting out in front of them and thwarting the attacks. I'll give you the final word before we change topics.
It reminds me of a football team who is just such a big juggernaut, who just feels like they can't be beat. They don't get prepared for the opponent who's hungry and wants to beat them, right? And then they end up getting your butt whipped in a football game. He needs to be just as hungry as he was. He needs to be prepping just as hard as he always has been. And he needs to not take the base for granted, because they'll jump ship fast. And when they do, we're looking at 4 years of Joe Biden. Joe Biden. Kamala Harris. I'm not sure which one. Whoever's in charge.
President by committee.
President by committee right now. He just cannot take for granted what he's doing, and he needs to be out there swinging hard. Yeah. He has to. And quarterback this thing. Whoever's the coach, he's the quarterback. Whoever's the coach calling the plays right now, they're calling bad plays.
Yeah. To what you just said, there's an old saying from greyhound racing that the hungry dog runs faster. Now, obviously, that's going to upset animal rights activists because it involved the practice of withholding food from the dog. Not saying I endorse that, but that's the saying, that the hungry dog runs the fastest. And when you sit on your heels, when you rest on your laurels, you open yourself up for self-inflicted self-owns or being attacked from the outside. So we'll see. But Trump's got to get better. And if he wants people like me to be ardent supporters, if he wants the pro-life movement, he wants conservatives to be rallying around him and not just biting their tongue, he's going to have to get better and have a better handle on these issues.
He could hire us. I mean, I'm a social engineer. Yeah. You got your master's in poli-sci. I mean, we're ready to go, dude. Yeah. So if you want to call, just reach out here to the show. We'll help out Mr. Trump. We're there for you, buddy.
And we are there for him. Like we do support him. It's just, this isn't something that, these aren't things that we can just sit back and like say like, yep, that's our guy. It's uncomfortable. It's just so uncomfortable.
It is, because I mean, it's hard enough. You got to defend him all the time when he was in his prime, like the prime of the first one. Now you really got to defend it, right? And it's like, it's hard. But
at one point, I wasn't paid, but I was an unpaid surrogate for the Trump campaign. I don't know if you knew this. I did radio interviews in 2015, 2016, and I would get talking points from the campaign. Right back when they were like trying to figure themselves out, there wasn't really a top-down structure. I would get talking points. I would get like daily, weekly talking points of what to say, and I would do like weekly, multiple times a week radio interviews defending him. And it's just so funny. Like it's like they'd ask me like, oh, Mexico's sending all the rapists and that's why we need the border wall. And I'd just be like, damn right. He's locking kids in cages. Like, you're damn right he is. Like, you know what I mean? Like there have been moments where like it's defend him on these policies. This one's hard. It's really hard. By the way, also Biden is locking kids in cages now.
Oh, it's even worse.
And it's worse than ever before, and no one's.
It's worse than ever before.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, it's their country, not yours.
No, we're shipping them all to you right now.
I'm just saying, man, it's their country, not yours. Let that sink in. Think about that.
Yeah. Well, we just talked about what civil rights laws meant at the time of the founding, at the time that these civil rights laws were passed. This is a good segue into another thing I wanted to bring up because it's so appalling, so disgusting. I feel like we have to call it out. We've talked about this issue before. Cases that are making their way through the federal court system, dealing with the right to own a handgun or any gun for that matter, and challenging whether it's constitutional to bar felons from ever owning a gun again for the rest of their life. And there is a case, U.S. v. Rahimi, that's set to have oral arguments before the Supreme Court in early November. And there's other court cases bouncing around in the lower courts dealing with this same issue. And some of those cases are really, it's really hard to get behind the plaintiff, the guy suing like, oh man, you did some bad things. You were not a good hombre.
Nope.
It's hard to get behind them. But when you read the arguments and you say, well, it's very obvious that the founders didn't intend for someone who committed like check fraud 20 years ago to never be able to defend themselves again for the rest of their life. It's very obvious. Well, there is a case in Alabama, U.S. v. Jackson, where the guy who's suing for his rights back, challenging the ability for the government to charge him with a felon in possession of a firearm statute, Jackson is suing. The government is having to jump through some really uncomfortable hoops to defend their ability to punish felons for having guns. And there was something, I sent it to you. You were shocked to see this. I was shocked to see this. I'll go ahead and put it up on the screen. I'll read it for everyone listening to the audio version, which, by the way, if you haven't already, links in the description. Please do subscribe to those audio versions. I'll read this for everyone. This is the government's defense. The law, quote, the law-abiding limitation derives not from the meaning of the people, but instead from the phrase, quote, shall not be infringed, which modified the right that was at issue. A directive that a right shall not be infringed signals that the right at issue already exists. They cite Heller v. DC, explain that this phrase implicitly recognizes the preexistence of the right. To discern the contours of the Second Amendment is appropriate to turn to its predecessor in the English Declaration of Rights. The protection
Keep going.
The protection in the English Declaration of Rights did not protect everyone. Instead, it limited the disarmament of Protestant subjects of the kingdom. By its terms, the English provision was, quote, was an individual right not available to the whole population, given that it was restricted to Protestants. And like all written English rights, it was held only against the crown, not Parliament, end quote. For example, the English right did not protect Catholics. The English government's disarmament of Catholics had a close connection to that government's views on loyalty and criminality. The Heller Court, relying on Blackstone, described the firearm prohibition for Catholics as a sanction for those who receive convictions for failure to attend services in the Church of England. Basically, Catholics are criminals because they aren't Anglicans. Thus, it follows that the English did not perceive the Declaration of Rights to stand in the way of regulations on persons the government deemed to be criminal actors. And this is where they try and clear it up. To be clear, a criminal penalty or firearm regulation that discriminates based on religion or any other protected characteristic would not pass muster today. Such a law would be invalid, however, because other constitutional and statutory provisions now protect against such discriminations. Laws like the English Declaration of Rights still are relevant to the analysis of the Second Amendment because these restrictions shed light on how the framers viewed the impact of this particular provision.
I don't know where to start here. So let's go back to the tyranny of the crown to try and justify limiting the Second Amendment, the same Second Amendment that was put in the Constitution to help protect us from the tyranny that was created by the crown that we then removed ourselves from in the American Revolution. Does that sound close?
Yeah. The SparkNotes version is that you have U.S. government, DOJ attorneys arguing that the Second Amendment should allow the government to disarm people that they claim are not part of the people because the British Crown and not the Parliament, they go out of their way to say it's the Crown, not the Parliament. The Crown disarmed Catholics simply for being Catholic. And that is why the federal government should be allowed to disarm felons. Basically saying that felons are like Catholics or Catholics are like felons. The entire reason that the Second Amendment exists, the Second Amendment did not derive itself from the English Declaration of Rights. The founders were very clear that the Second Amendment protects an individual, natural, God-given right that precedes the formation of government entirely. It is, if there was not a single government in the entire world, you would still have the right to defend yourself by the basis of your very humanity and the fact that you are created in the image of God. That's clear.
Very.
So the Second Amendment was written by the people who just fought the British to get away from that system.
Mm-hmm.
Say that system is unjust, unfair, and a violation of these rights. And to ensure that no government can ever infringe on the rights of its people again, we are going to enshrine the right to keep and bear arms in the Constitution. For the U.S. government to turn around and say that the very English laws that they were fighting to get away from should win the day here. It makes you wonder how any of these lawyers got out of Constitutional Law 101.
Well, it shows you how weak their argument is that they have to go back to English common law to try to get rid of the Second Amendment, or at least for felons, right? And a felony did not exist at the ratification or the signing or the creation, right? So what laws out there ever said that if you did something wrong, you lost every single right? It just doesn't exist. And the felony is just another one of those constructed things that just helped us. I know it sounds like almost kind of like an enslavement thing, right? You'd always kind of be enslaved to the system. And if they're going to use this kind of mental gymnastics to get their way, I mean, what happens when someone says, well, what about the issue of slavery? Can you just bring back slavery because it existed in England at the time, or the woman's right to vote? Can that be removed based on that? I mean, if you're going to go to Old English law, we would all just be a bunch of serfs, serving the state, which is what they want, which was what they know, which is scary. So it's like they're trying to bring the crown back, man.
Yeah. A little bit of self-promotion again. I go through all of this in my book. I know. This is like,
it's like you had a book about it.
Yeah, I actually didn't plan this show around both my books, but they both fit. The whole reason that the Supreme Court used Blackstone, that English legal dictionary that they're referring to, is because there was a question of what the word arms meant and what the term keep arms, what the term bear arms, and what the term militia meant, right? So they used the dictionary that existed at the time to figure out what the founders meant when they used very specific language, to then turn to that English law dictionary and say, well, it also says Catholics have no rights. Yeah. Therefore, the founders meant that. It's stupid. It's stupid.
It's not just mental gymnastic. This is like trying to affect law based on a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the best way to put it. I don't like. I was so flabbergasted when you showed me this that I thought to myself, this can't be real. I thought for a moment there it was a joke, right?
Yeah. And
no, you're like, dude, this is real. And I've known some felons over time. I know some people that are felons who are good people now. But the question is that is there any prohibition for you to own any of those things because you're a felon? And I think the answer, and I've said this before, I said this to you a long time ago, I don't think it does. I mean, what happens if they want to start making you crossing the street wearing an American shirt a felony?
Yeah.
Right. And then now you give everything up. It's not hard to create a law that would make everybody a felony. Heck, you walk down the street, and I think on average people break 7 felonies a day or something stupid, right?
Lots of crimes. I don't know if they're all felonies.
Yeah, but you get what I'm saying.
Speeding. Right. Like if you ever get pulled over and the officer tells you how fast you're going, don't give an answer, because chances are you were 1 mile an hour over, right? Just don't answer. I mean, there's a difference between saying that someone who is actively committing crimes, like Hunter Biden, crackhead, shouldn't have guns while they are a crackhead, because the act of being a crackhead makes them dangerous. It's another thing to say that someone who bounced a few checks a couple decades ago can never defend themselves, right? Those are very different arguments. And this is where we're going to get into some very uncomfortable talking points, because one of, in my opinion, the most egregious violations of the Second Amendment, but politically popular, has been federal law that states that even if you commit a domestic violence misdemeanor, you can lose your gun rights. Now, not talking felonies, not talking about violent felonies, misdemeanors, which in some states can just be verbal accosting, you lose your gun rights because you got in a heated argument with your spouse. And this is funny because in the Rahimi case that we've talked about at length on this podcast, we don't have to get into it. That individual, Rahimi, is a suspected criminal, a suspected domestic abuser. And all of these organizations are basically petitioning the Supreme Court saying, hey, be careful. You're about to open up the floodgates and let domestic abusers have guns. I am a nerd and I like to read these amicus briefings. This was submitted by the city of New York. And this is a startling admission. I was surprised to find this. They say, quote, in simple terms, domestic violence was not generally perceived as a societal problem by the founding or Reconstruction generations. Instead, for much of our nation's history, it was largely viewed as a private matter, not requiring a coordinated societal or governmental response. Since before the founding, the legal system tolerated domestic violence under various legal theories. While the law generally condemned spousal assault in its extremes and sometimes punished it, courts routinely avoided holding abusers accountable and prevented women from escaping violent marriages. Some courts relied on the so-called right of chastisement, which allowed a husband to use a shocking degree of violence, quote, as is necessary to control an unruly temper and make his wife behave herself, end quote. So we don't endorse that.
No.
You don't think you'd see that in a briefing from pro-gun control groups.
Mm-hmm.
But by their very definition, neither the founders nor the Reconstruction era generations understood and believed that spousal abuse, domestic violence, misdemeanor domestic violence involving angry words should eliminate someone's God-given right.
Mm-hmm. We don't agree with it. Yeah.
And it's an uncomfortable conversation to have because no one really wants domestic abusers to have guns. We don't, right? But under the Supreme Court's guidance in Bruen, if you look at the historical record, no one can possibly argue that when pen was put to paper, the men who wrote the Second Amendment intended for domestic violence to get rid of a God-given right. It's an uncomfortable conversation we're going to have, but not something I think we should run away from because we're afraid of the popular consequences of staking that position.
There are some states where if you do file for just divorce, they immediately give a restraining order, right? And a restraining order can prevent you from purchasing a firearm. And I think that it's going to be part of those arguments too, is what point does the government, overstepping your rights just to try to have feel good emotions about stuff, right? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Now, we do not support spousal abuse in any way. I think you're a horrible person if you do it. But none of these things remove your rights. They just don't.
Yeah.
And I've taken that position on a lot, and I've been really unpopular with people about that one, right? So you don't think a former felon killer should not be allowed to have guns? And the answer would be, if I stick to my guns, no, because he still has those rights the moment he gets out, right? I mean, at what point is the debt to society paid?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that it's expensive right now. It costs you all of your rights, the ability to vote, right? The ability to bear arms, heck, the ability to get a job sometimes just because that felon tag follows you, right? And it's hard to get off the paper. That's what a lot of felons call it. It's hard to just get off the paper system, always being in some sort of system, and it's always kind of holding you down and back. And it's like,
we know that the act of committing a felony, you lose your gun rights, you go to prison, and you don't get to have a gun in prison, right? No. So we understand that, right? What I hope is that in a political system that we live in, where the Second Amendment is a God-given right, and you can't just say that. I mean, our old boss Joe Altman told a story once where he had it was a friend or a family member lost their gun rights because they got in a heated argument with their ex-spouse and threw a piece of pizza at a sliding glass door. And the courts interpreted the act of throwing that pizza as a violent act against a spouse. And that was enough to lose the gun rights. I don't know if it was forever or temporarily. I was always shocked by that story he told. If we're going to have a society where this is not how it works, then hopefully we'll do a better job at convicting, sentencing, and incarcerating the violent people. If you don't want felons to have guns and have gun rights, stop allowing them to plead down to misdemeanors. Stop asking the court for the minimal sentence. If you think they're too violent to own a gun, then you should also believe they're too violent to be out amongst us in society. Because as we both know, the criminals don't care about the gun rights. So that would be my solution to this. But no,
solid argument.
The same side that says you should disarm the domestic abusers also want to let the felons out. So none of it makes sense.
Which way do you think this one's going to play out? I mean, if we had to put odds on it, you're like,
well, this isn't the case. Rahimi, as we've said on the podcast before, is not the case I would want the Supreme Court to hear on this issue.
Right.
Because he's objectively a bad hombre based on the accusations.
Yes.
But according to Bruen, the accusation, because he was never charged with these crimes, it was just the accusation of the crimes, domestic violence crimes, are what kind of triggered this. He's never charged, never convicted.
Right.
It's a very reasonable argument to make that you have to be tried and convicted at the very least to lose your gun rights. I just hope that the Supreme Court doesn't use this as an opportunity to claw back that Bruen decision that they released just a year ago.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, it's all that.
Go ahead. Finish it up.
Yeah, I got nothing. Just go from there. You kind of wrapped it up there. You kind of said what I was thinking in my head. So,
well, something came across before we go. Something came across my desk, and I shared it with you. And we don't want to dive into it too much because I have a policy. You have a policy of not getting involved in active defamation cases. I think the world is a better place when you and I are not subpoenaed and called to testify, which has happened to you. Has happened to me. Has happened to me. Has happened to me. Got to spend a glorious 8 hours getting grilled. Whatever.
Right.
I have to say though, this was a small world moment, and I don't know if there's a take on this. I just found it shocking. The country of Ukraine has named this transgender individual, who now goes by Sarah Ashton Cirillo, has named this individual as the spokesperson for the Ukrainian military, which is a small world situation because this person is I just lost it. Suing our former boss for defamation. And I just thought this was a really crazy world that we live in, but also that this person is now, as the spokesperson of the Ukrainian military, according to this, which I don't know how much I trust this website, they have come out with a list of what this person calls Russian propagandists that need to be held accountable for not supporting Ukraine, and that list includes Americans, likely our former boss. It's just a weird small world moment that this person is suing our former boss for allegations he made against them, but now also in their official capacity as a spokesperson for a foreign country, labeling our former boss as an enemy of the state that needs to be, I don't know if that person uses the language hunted down, but needs to be held accountable. Is what I read.
Yeah.
It's just a small world. It's such a small world.
Blew my mind. The first thing I thought was why would you want to hire a transgender person to represent spokesperson for the military? I mean, don't you need warriors?
Human rights, equal.
Okay. I'll admit I'm wrong on that one. Maybe.
No. Well, no. It's a weird look for an American. I think let's take a step back. An American,
I like that better.
Is your military spokesperson? Forget about everything else. American. My whole deal is equal rights, equal fights.
Yeah.
So
small world. Were you kind of taken back by it when you saw it? I mean, I was. At first, I was like, "You're like Max. This one's."
It's just a small world, and we weren't involved in that whole case that happened after we left. It's just such a small world. And it's so weird. It's just so weird. Everything about it. And for Cirillo now to go after the very people that she's suing It's just so weird. It's so weird.
It is. I don't know. It just makes you things that sometimes are just too connected sometimes. You know what I mean? They're just too connected. Too
connected. Well, that's all we have. Don't want to get too into that, but it's just something that makes you wonder. That's it for this edition of the Right Guys podcast. If you missed at the start, we are going to be going live twice a week now, so make sure you stay tuned for that on Rumble, on YouTube when allowed, and I've been broadcasting on Twitter. I don't know if I'll keep doing that, but we'll see. Also, check out all the links in the description for the audio editions: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Audible, and Podbean. All of these great places, links in the description. If you watch live, please make sure you also subscribe to the audio so that we can prove these numbers. Because as we grow, we want to get sponsors. We want to grow the show. That's all I have. You have anything else?
Just stay safe out there. Love America and vote your heart.
Yep. And remember, everyone, the fight to take back the country is not over yet. The only way we win is if we all stand and fight together. See you Friday.